I am Mike Goodman. I am the senior editor for soccer at CBSSports.com, and I'm the co-host of the Double Pivot podcast, the world's most agreeable soccer analytics podcast.
Right. So, how's this World Cup in your kind of media circle being anticipated by American fans in particular?
I will tell you from my perspective as an American soccer media professional, because there are not a lot of us. And I think this goes to a lot of American soccer fandom at this current point in history, which is that I think a lot of people were hoping this was going to be a celebration and a crowning achievement and a happy, joyous event, aside from the competitive nature of the US team. That just like, if you're invested in soccer in America, there are very few times in life where you get to be at the center of attention. And I think, as it has turned out, there are a whole lot of people who would really just rather not right now. And I think there's a lot of sort of like dissonance between like, how do we resolve where America is on the world stage, where America is politically, where FIFA is politically, and with our joy at the sport. And it's very, very hard to feel as positive as one might have hoped one would be feeling heading into this World Cup.
Right. So, this is my third question, but I'm putting it here now. How do you feel like this World Cup is going to be used, or is being used even, by the current administration to further project American power?
Sure. Look,
That's the question.
I don't think anybody is naive these days about what the World Cup is, both in recent history and throughout history. I mean, the World Cup has been in South America when atrocities were occurring. The World Cup has been in recent history in Russia and Qatar, which are not free societies. It is clear that the United States right now views itself in that mold, right? Views itself as a country that wants to be seen in that mold. Now, America is a big place with a lot of history and a lot of different kinds of people, and the success of that project is questionable at best. And I think part of what you're seeing in relation to the World Cup, honestly, is a fairly ineffectual job of using something like the World Cup to further those ends. I mean, the World Cup is very publicly being contested as problematic, if you want to use that word, in a lot of ways, in ways that authoritarians historically have been able to prevent, right? Like, if you are an effective authoritarian political leader, when you host the World Cup, you have the ability to make sure everybody in your country celebrates having the World Cup. And that is not the case right now, nor should it be. And so I think it is, whatever the powers that be might want it to be, it really is a standing representation of this tension in sort of in the current moment in the United States.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. What's your reading or description in this current moment of American footballing culture? Like, where are we in that kind of timeline?
Yeah, it's also interesting in its own way. And I think in a different timeline, this would be the central question of American soccer right now. Yes. Because 4 years ago was not a bad World Cup, exactly. They got out of the group stage. You know, they lost to the Netherlands, and they weren't blown out, but they lost, and lost comfortably. It was sort of like what you would consider to be an on-par result for a country like the United States. And then the program spent a year melting down, like absolutely melting down. They didn't bring back the head coach, Greg Berhalter. Then eventually they rehired Greg Berhalter after a couple of interims. And there was this giant controversy surrounding Gio Reyna, who at the time was one of the most important players in the player pool. Now is maybe not going to make the World Cup squad. Hard to say. Berhalter lasts through the next summer and gets fired. And then, you know, Berhalter is class one school of American soccer program progression. American coached in MLS, kind of a lifer. And then they go the complete other direction and hire Mauricio Pochettino, European centric, even though he's Argentinian, big name. Like, he's a get, right? Like, he's a guy that you go out and you get and you parade around and say, this guy, this shows that we are serious and he is going to take us in a new direction and a better direction. And like, I'm going to like air quotes, kinda. Like, he definitely went out. He definitely expanded the player pool, brought lots of players in who maybe hadn't been getting looks before. The guys all talk about how he's changed the culture. He's instituted everybody taking things much more seriously, being much more invested. And in the last 9 months to a year, the results have started to come. And there've been some tactical changes, there've been some adjustments. But I think if you sort of look ahead to what this World Cup squad is going to be, it's pretty close to what you could have predicted 4 years ago. The tactics are a little bit different, the approach is a little bit different. But at the end of the day, the player pool is what matters, right? And the United States player pool is, on the one hand, stronger than it has ever been, sort of in the middle. It is routine for American guys to be playing in the big 5 leagues in Europe now. There's just like, there's a dozen of them. Like, Brendan Aronson plays for Leeds, right? It's not even a big deal. He's not even like one of Leeds' best players or worst players. He's just a guy that plays for Leeds. And he's a guy that will maybe start for the United States. That's not where this program was 8 years ago at all. And so that's really a positive, right? Tanner Tessman plays midfield and defense for Lyon. And maybe he'll make the squad, maybe won't, isn't a starter. Like, that's not where this program was. On the other hand, the handful of guys that you would have looked at 4 years ago and said, maybe they'll be superstars. Maybe they'll be some of the best players in the world at the top end of this talent. They have not developed at the very top end of what they might have been. That's Pulisic, who's a very good player. Starts week in, week out for Milan. Is he a top 10 player in the world? No. Was it ever realistic to think he could be? I don't know. Maybe not. But people did.
Top 10. Right? That's crazy.
Yeah, well, you should see.
Didn't someone call him the LeBron James of soccer? I forget who did that, but
it was I don't want to say the wrong name accidentally, but it was an American sports talk radio guy. Yes. Weston McKennie having a very good career. Is he a superstar? Probably not. Gio Reyna completely went the other direction. Can't get on the field for Mönchengladbach, right? So the player pool is broadly moving in the right direction, but the stars have not like taken those giant leaps that you kind of need them to at the very top.
So like in your reading, relative to its own standard, whatever that standard may be, do you think American football is in a healthy place or in a not healthy place?
I think it's in a pretty healthy place, but I tend to take these like really like 30,000 foot view of these things, like from like a really removed perspective. I think that like talent for countries changes across generations. You're talking about 20-year time horizons, 30-year time horizons. And if you look like, I think everybody is using the instinctive comparison back to 1994, the last time the United States hosted the World Cup. American soccer is unrecognizable from then to now. Like, both domestically with MLS, where players are playing, how they're playing, it's a completely unrecognizable culture in a very good way. And so from that perspective, I really do think that United States soccer is moving in the right direction. Now, on a narrower question, from 4 years ago to now, have they moved forward as much as you would have hoped with being the central host of a World Cup? They have not. I think walking out of a World Cup 4 years ago with Pulisic with the heart of his career ahead of him, having just, made the knockouts and been okay, you would have hoped that you'd be looking here and thinking, boy, if everything goes right, they could be a semifinalist. And who knows what happens from there. And now you're thinking, look, make the knockouts. You should make the knockouts. Win a game. You should win the round of 32, and then let's see where we are in the round of 16. And that's okay, but it's not like the top end of where you might have hoped to be 4 years ago.
Do you think Americans are capable of handling just like a mid team?
Yeah, that's a really, really sharp question. Because part of what's happening here is that there's this trajectory that the United States is on from being not at all a soccer country, not at all a soccer team that is, right, didn't went 50 years without being in a World Cup until 1994. And then, there's been hiccups along the way, obviously, but for the most part, steady progress going forward. And I think if you are 25 or 45 or 60 and you've watched US soccer, you've seen progress. And you might think to yourself, well, that progress continues and we're going to be one of the best nations in the world. The thing is, it's a lot easier to go from like 75 to 50 to 35 to 15 than it is to go from 15 to 8.
Yeah.
To say nothing of, top 5. And I don't know. Like, my guess is that the U.S. kind of stagnates here in the world. Roughly the level of Mexico, top 10, 11-ish. Like, when everything is breaking perfectly, 20-ish to 15-ish if things are going okay for a while. Like, I think that's just where you're going to be for a while because it's real hard to get better than that.
It's just when I juxtapose it with the women's team who are elite, or then you go to other sports, the basketball teams and whatever else, baseball generally. It's like when America cares about something, they do well in it. So the men's national team being, the host of the World Cup, I just wonder if it's like a round of 16 exit. It's like,
So, I mean, one thing, I totally agree with you. When America cares about something, they do well at it. The caveat there is it's because America spends a ton of money on it. And that in so many things, in sports, spending a ton of money on it, that's all it takes. Like, if you spend a ton of money on women's soccer in the 1990s and you're the United States, nobody else is spending any money on women's soccer. That's what it takes. And now it's a little harder for them to maintain that level as other nations are catching up and investing more. You look at like Olympic sports. The U.S. invests tons of money. That's why they're good at these things. U.S. soccer, one, doesn't invest tons of money and really doesn't have the money to invest. But two, lots of countries around the world, soccer is the thing, the sport that they invest tons of money in. And you're not going to just slingshot by them all because you've decided to also spend. Right. And I do think that's sort of the challenge for men's soccer in America is you have to spend more. You have to do the thing where you're catching talent and bringing in talent and all of these things. But you're a big country. There's talent to be had. If playing soccer made you more money than playing basketball or playing football or playing baseball, more kids would be playing soccer. More of those kids would turn out to be great soccer players. Is America ever going to get there? Like, I don't really think so. Like, it's just sort of the economics of it.
There are arguments to be made that it's even incentivized to where that doesn't happen. That the NFL, the NBA, they want the player pool, the talent pool to be playing their specific sport. So then they spend the money to make sure that it's pervasive in youth sports. But anyway, what if the men's national team done during qualifying while everyone else is qualifying?
It's rough. They've played a lot of interesting friendlies and they've scheduled smartly, I think. And, they went a while because they played in Copa America 2 summers ago and it didn't go well. And then they had a Gold Cup that summer, which went not well. And then you looked around, you're like, well, you're not going to do anything now until the World Cup. What are you going to do? And they scheduled friendlies well. They've played teams like Japan. They've played teams like Turkey. They've played teams like Uruguay in friendlies to really give themselves challenges. And those challenges went well in the last year. And they've scheduled teams like Belgium and Portugal last window, which did not go well as they jumped up in class, but that's okay. But they've been playing an interesting group of friendlies in order to prepare themselves for the World Cup. And there's only so much that can do for you when you don't have like the sort of real top level of competition, but it's sort of just how it goes when you don't have to qualify.
What's your read on Pochettino? Are you with him, against him? Are you like where are you at with him?
I think it's been a worthwhile experiment. I think if you listen to Pochettino in interviews and you sort of read the tea leaves a little bit, I think he probably got here, took the job, showed up, and was like, "What? This is what this is?" Like he was sort of vocally aghast at how not serious players sort of attitudinally were taking friendlies and taking being called into camp and all of these things. And I think the sort of underpinning structure of U.S. soccer in the same way, he was like, why are there not more dedicated, built up structures and resources for me to lean on and rely on and all of these things? And like, I fully anticipate an hour and a half after the World Cup is over, Mauricio Pochettino will be out the door heading back to the club game. And that's fine. I do think he's done some things quite admirably. He really has invested in seeing lots of players come through camp, and not necessarily with the aim, I think, of discovering somebody that everybody had missed. I just think he felt it was important to make sure that all of the best players in the pool knew their jobs were not necessarily safe by default. And some guys really did fall out of the picture. Gio Reyna may still make the squad, but he's one of those guys. You know, a lot of the guys on the fringe from the last World Cup rotated off, and you have other guys who have, you know, Malik Tillman from Bayer Leverkusen now is a good example of somebody who's just really slotted seamlessly into the current mix. Balogun as well is another guy who getting him predates Pochettino, but you know, is just sort of like settled into the striker role. Finding some newish and innovative ways to use Tim Weah, because you're playing a lot of the time you're playing sort of a hybrid back three, which the United States have never really done before. Like, I mean, the, you know, sort of slight tactical wrinkles are kind of a big deal. So stuff like that has been good. I think I don't think there's any like Pochettino magic that's gonna like turn a team that is a borderline quarterfinal, you know, like a borderline top 16 team into like a semifinalist. I think like, you know, I think you can probably count on one hand the number of really strong managers who come into the international game and do that for their team. And like, I say that also understanding that the international manager pool right now is pretty strong as these things go. With Nagelsmann in Germany, Tuchel in England, like a lot of these, like a fair number of big name managers took international jobs ahead of this World Cup. And I think there's some like kind of funny reasons for that, but Pochettino is one of them. Like it would not surprise me if Pochettino leaves the US job and walks right into Real Madrid. Like that would not be a shock, I don't think, for anybody. I don't know that it's going to happen, but it could. And that's to say he's doing a fine job. He's doing a good job, I think, but he's not like revolutionizing anything with the United States.
Right. So let's do more proper nouns.
Yeah.
You mentioned Pulisic earlier. You mentioned McKinney. I throw in Chris Richards maybe.
Yeah.
Which of the star players do you think are in a good moment to perform well?
Chris Richards is, you know, far and away the first name on that list. And again, what I was talking about before, right? Like guys who just go and play in Europe and it's not like a big thing. Chris Richards is a stalwart at Crystal Palace, and he's become that after a career where like he broke through early at Bayern, got bumped down the Bundesliga table. It's like under 5 million, I think, for Palace when they got him. Really cheap. and has just been really good. He is solid positionally. He's good physically. He's a good passer. He can play on the right side of a back two. He can play in a back three. If pushed, he can play as an emergency fullback. Although, God, you don't really want to see the U.S. in that position. But it's a testament to his talent. I think if you asked me if the U.S. did shock, like let's say they're in the quarterfinals and all of a sudden they're up 1-0 against Belgium with 10 minutes to go. How did we get here? It's because Chris Richards is having a breakout tournament. It's because Chris Richards is going to be a guy that people are talking about moving to a top club for $60 million at the end of the World Cup. To me, far and away right now, Chris Richards is the guy who has the biggest likelihood to define this U.S. team. I think beyond that, Weston McKennie is in a weird place because he's actually had a really good season for Juventus, a really good season. He is a guy that every year Juventus has a new manager or three, and every year each one says, well, Weston McKennie's not really in my plans. And then every year Weston McKennie plays his way into the starting lineup. And it's no different this year. But because of all that stuff, he's only played sort of intermittently with the national team under Pochettino. And he's going to come in. He's going to start. It's a little unclear whether he'll start as part of a double pivot in the middle of center midfield, or he'll play in sort of the attacking band of three-ish behind, two or three-ish, depending on how you want to interpret things, behind a striker. He can do either. He'll probably do both over the course of a tournament. And he could just be the U.S.'s leading goal scorer. I don't think that would be that surprising. Alternatively, Pulisic had a great start to the season for Milan. He is not. Hasn't scored, I think, since late December at this point. And as we sit here in almost the end of April, it's a long drought. And there have been years where Pulisic has showed flashes of being good and gotten hurt, and everybody's concerned, and they're just playing too many games, and they think okay, take a break here, take a break there. Last summer, he didn't join up with the U.S. men's national team to get his body right. And this year, Milan aren't in any European competitions. They're only playing once a week. He's starting every game. And again, he has a great first half of the season and his body breaks down. And so you just sort of wonder, is it really physically ever going to happen for Pulisic, even as he's turned himself into a very, very good attacking player. Yeah, and then I think I should mention Balogun here too, because he scored a lot of goals this year. And that's just a rare thing for the United States to have, is a striker who scored a lot of goals in Europe.
Is there any underlying cool data point that you're interested in? This occurred to ask.
Yes.
It just occurred to me. Is there anything in the United States team that you're this is a really good sign, or maybe more interestingly, this is a really bad sign?
So I don't think there's anything traditionally to the U.S. team right now that jumps out at me. I think generally for the World Cup, yes. And how the U.S. relates to it, sure. So I think, look, it's not a secret, right? Set pieces have sort of, corners specifically, have taken European soccer by storm this year in a very real way. And specifically the quote unquote meat wall, which my podcast partner, Michael Kelly, termed it, where they just crash the goalie and put the ball in the 6-yard box and hope to scramble it in, is very effective. And I think you're going to see England doing it. I think you're going to see a lot of the top teams doing it. Over the last year, I have not seen the United States doing it. And it's just a mistake if you're not doing it. And I am sort of curious as to how they approach that. I just sort of think you're leaving, a third of an XG or whatever a match on the table if you're not taking that approach. And so I'd like to see more of that from the U.S. There was a time when stuff like that would have been what the U.S. men were at the forefront of. The sort of scruffy, data-driven and analysis way to generate yourself an extra quarter of a goal of expectation a match. That's the opposite of what Pochettino is in a lot of ways. Not for bad, but it's interesting that it's sort of sweeping the world at the same time that the U.S. does not seem to be there mentally.
And it also feels stereotypically American, just
right?
Be strong on set pieces, good delivery, use your strength, high physicality, whatever.
Right? Leverage your athleticism. Leverage athleticism is the most American phrase you could possibly imagine about soccer.
Right. All right. So, what's America's floor? What's their ceiling? And what
I mean,
pressure is there to be successful, however success is defined?
yeah. So look, I think uh, I'm a, I'm a little worried that I'm gonna like curse them when I say this, but I think
Ah.
their floor is getting out of the group. It's really hard to imagine that they won't get out of the group here. I think they're favorites to win the group, and they should be. You know, like Turkey would be the other team in that group that could possibly really be pretty decent. Um, they beat Turkey this year. I don't know. I mean, I think that it would be legitimately shocking if they did not get out of the group in this tournament. Um, from there, like I don't see a reason why they can't. Like, how do you define success? I would define success as a round of 16 team, and they should be successful on those terms. I don't know that everybody would define success that way. I think some people are a little more optimistic than I am. I think some people are a little more pessimistic. But I would define success as a round of 16 team, and I think they're going to be successful. Can they be much more than that? I'm pretty skeptical. I think when you run into even the second tier of sort of really good teams, your Belgiums, um, they're going to struggle a little bit. You know, I mean, they have a couple good wins this year. Good win against Turkey, a good win against Uruguay, but you're real hard pressed to find a lot of those, and you're real hard pressed to find a lot of reasons why you might expect them to beat a very good team.
So, in
So,
your no, I was just gonna say, in your wildest imagination, like, what's the furthest they get?
oh, like
Is like quarterfinal,
semifinal. I mean,
semifinal
like
ish?
semifinals. Like you get a good draw, right? You get a good draw. You get to the round of 16. Somebody else got upset. All of a sudden, you're facing like Norway. Like you're not a favorite against Norway, but you can beat Norway, and then you're in the quarterfinals. And like whatever, maybe you get outshot 14-3 and you win 1-0. It happens. So like it's soccer. Like stuff can happen.
Right.
I think the thing that I'm clear about is like if you're making a deep run in this tournament, it's not because you have revealed yourself to be a lot better than we all thought. It's because you're okay and stuff has happened.
Yes. Who's your pick to win the World Cup, Mike?
Oh boy.
Or picks. You can give me like, your top
can
three.
Well, I mean, so we're talking shortly after Lamine Yamal got hurt and then was ruled that he will probably be healthy for the World Cup, and I'm super skeptical about like how healthy he'll be.
It's giving it's giving O2 Zidane for me.
Very much so.
Yes.
And had he been healthy, I think I would have just said Spain and moved on. I'll say France. I don't know. Like Mbappe is Mbappe. Michael Olise is so good, and they just don't ever give up goals. Like they play the most boring. We're not going to give up goals because we have four guys who are brilliant attacker style, and it works. So I'll say France. You know, I think the odds are pretty clear that it's like Spain, France, England, Argentina, Brazil, everybody else. And I think that like there's nothing in there that seems like wrong to me. And I just can't really bring myself to pick England. So, all
right, last question. Is there anything I haven't asked about American football that you find particularly interesting that people should know or might want to know?
We haven't talked. I mean, this is a little in the weeds. We haven't talked about Zach Crocker, who is the head of American soccer, or was the head of American soccer.
Let's get into it.
He left for Saudi Arabia like less than 2 months before a World Cup, and it's a little weird. I mean, obviously Saudi Arabia paid him a lot of money, but like he's the guy that went out and brought in Pochettino. And I don't think it has an immediate impact on this World Cup, but it's sort of indicative that like the structures of American soccer are not particularly strong. And they are currently sort of not disastrous. They're pretty good, but they're pretty good because of all of these decent players. And because more and more decent players keep developing. And you just have to be intentionally more driven and focused if you're going to take another step forward. And, you know, I'm happy to watch a lot of pretty good Americans because I'm old enough to remember when, that wasn't the case. Like, I've worked with, I've been lucky enough to work with guys like Charlie Davies and Mo Edu, sort of peripherally over the course of my career. And like, they'd be the first to tell you we wouldn't sniff this version of the United States men's national team. And that's great. But they'll also be the first to tell you that this version of the United States men's national team won't sniff the best teams in the world, and so you really need to have a plan to get from there to here. And I think, I'll just sort of wrap up by saying a lot of people hoped the United States would be walking down the path of that plan when the World Cup came, and we would all be celebrating it. And both on the team side and the world side, none of that is the case.
That would be a good place to end, but I do have one sneaky question that maybe it's more.
Please let me end on a higher note than that.
What's one city that's a host that you think foreign people that have never been to the States will go to and just be like, oh, I actually like Philly or Miami or Atlanta or Houston? Where is it?
I was going to say, you really mentioned two of the ones that I was going to say, which are Philly and Houston.
Okay.
Which would not be necessarily stereotypical picks here. Two things I'm thinking. One has to be a city that isn't that has the stadium accessible. So part of this World Cup is American stadiums are really far outside of the city a lot. And a lot of people who might be coming to the World Cup are going to be like, what is this?
Like Dallas? Like you think you're going to Dallas, but it's not in Dallas at all.
Gillette Stadium? Fox, that's being called Boston? Boston? Even New York, right? Like MetLife Stadium is out in New Jersey, a train right away, and that train is costing people $150.
It's insane.
It's insane. But Philly, easy access to the stadium, very walkable city, smaller city that most of the time tourists don't come to, right? Because it's in between New York and DC on either side. So that, and then Houston is a great international city. It's just it's got a really good international vibe. And again, it's one that most people don't think of in that regard. So those would be my two, I think.
Cool. Mike, I thank you for taking the time to do this. Where can people find you again?
So you can find all of the CBS Sports soccer work on cbssports.com/soccer. I'm the senior editor there. And then I yak like this twice a week minimum at the Double Pivot podcast, which is nominally a soccer analytics podcast, but we talk about all of the politics inflected stuff that we sort of, gestured at here. We talk about Chelsea's finances if the situation calls for it. We're all over the place. So the
links will be in the description. Mike, again, thank you so much.
Happy to do it anytime.
My name is Roberto Rojas. I'm currently an associate editor for ESPN FC. And of course, I am a big Paraguay fan because of my heritage. I am Paraguayan American, born and raised in the United States to Paraguayan parents. And of course, a big fan of La Roja.
Cool. All right. So how do you think this World Cup is being anticipated by Paraguayan fans?
Well, I mean, I think it's of joy, to be honest. The fact that Paraguay are qualified for their first World Cup in 16 years, I think, the fact that it happened, to the extent of the fact that the World Cup was expanded kind of helped a bit because obviously in World Cup qualification, the field got expanded to 2 spots as opposed to 4.5. It was 6.5. But nevertheless, no, I think people are very happy. The fact that for a generation of fans that weren't able to see Paraguay in the last 3 World Cups now have the chance to do it. Like I said, the last time was in South Africa, 2010. So, no, I think a lot of people are very excited about this, and I think when we get to discuss, the opponents, the group, and, just everything that's been going on, and, especially as myself being here in the United States, I think people are very, very excited. And, they're just waiting for June 12th for the first game against the United States to really get that dream of because it is a dream. Let's be real. It is a dream for, not just them, but for all the 48 countries to win the World Cup. And yeah, I think it's going to be something that hopefully goes in the best way possible for Paraguay. But I think everyone is just happy at the fact that they're back after such a long time.
So I tend to find that the fan expectation is very anticipatory, is very optimistic in that way. But when we look at the more journalistic, pessimistic route, so I want you to take the fan hat off, maybe put the journalist hat on. How or just and how it's being discussed in Paraguayan media in general? Like, is there an optimism there as well, or is it more like, I don't know if this team's ready, I don't know how it's gonna go?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point because certainly the fact that we had this draw back in December and obviously some friendlies a couple weeks ago to really kind of assess where we are in the world, and as someone that is always involved in these journalistic circles, be it from people that are working in the industry or just general fans of the sport, because I think all in all, even though they come from different sort of backgrounds and whatnot, I mean, we still care about the national team, and I think there will always be that sort of feeling of like, yeah, obviously we want to do well, but we're not of the upper echelon, and that's where a lot of countries of that sort of stature feel because they know that they are underdogs compared to like the top tier teams. So, no, I mean, look, I think there's still a lot to discuss, and obviously, we're speaking about a month and a half before the official World Cup squad deadlines that are about to be announced because that's when the manager Gustavo Alfaro has to put in his 26 names. And so, for the next month and a half or so, it's just going to be a constant debate. I feel like that's like the big discussion is like how the players are doing, how all those like, top players that are playing abroad, like your Miguel Mirons, your Diego Gomez's, your Julio Encisos, those guys, how are they performing? Where do they fit? What players are willing to, be on this squad? Because I was talking to a friend literally this morning about saying like, yo, it's so competitive. And it's like, even though we expanded, like the World Cup expanded as a whole with 16 new countries, but they also added 3 more names to the squad. So you would think, oh, there's more names to put in, but it just makes the competition even bigger. So no, I think, look, I think speaking from a general perspective, there are doubts because obviously, like I said, when you are from a country that isn't of that upper echelon and aren't considered a favorite, that you're more of an underdog, you're more of an outsider, like the majority of the field at this World Cup, I think it's more of the sense of like, okay, what players can I bring? What team can I use? What tactics can I use? What will Gustavo Alfaro, the coach, do to really better this team to hopefully eventually get that chance of a surprise? What are the other teams doing? What is the United States and Turkey and Australia doing? What's been going on? So I think from that sense, if you want it to be a bit more cerebral in that, how Paraguayans really feel, I think it's more of the sense of, what is going on in that sort of ecosystem of the players, the opponents, what the coach feels, and, just everything that's being read by the tea leaves, as we say over here in the United States as well.
So it's an interesting thing when teams qualify for the World Cup that maybe haven't been there in a bit. The question I want to ask most of the people I'm talking with is, what is the condition of your country's football? Is it in a healthy place? Is it in a bad place? But obviously, when you qualify for the World Cup, it would suggest that you're in a good place. But if you could maybe describe Paraguayan football both domestically and abroad, would you color it more in a good way or a bad way?
I mean, look, it's always difficult just because, it's spread out into a continent where you need to really demonstrate more than your average sort of team. When you look at it, let's look at it from a geographical standpoint. Paraguay is right in the middle of South America, and they're right between 2 of the big powerhouses, or 3 if you want to include Uruguay, but with Brazil and Argentina. Now, those 3, in essence, it's 2 because Brazil and Argentina are the main, gold standard. Uruguay obviously won the World Cup, so they have to be included in that sense as well. But I think when you look at that end, it's like, okay, these guys are the big powerhouses, and you have the rest. You have your Colombias, you have your Ecuadors, and your Paraguays and whatnot. So I think it's the sense of like comparable, like when I say how they measure up against the rest of the world, it also starts with how well you do against those big powerhouses. Now, like I mentioned, between Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, I mean, Paraguay has had the chance to beat all 3 in qualifying. I think that also has given them that sort of feeling of like, okay, this is a team that can actually be competitive because the way that their qualifying process has become is because of that. I think, the reason why they made the World Cup is obviously getting those wins and beating those big teams and obviously beating most of the continent to go into that sort of situation. So I think as a whole, yes, there are big problems like any sort of country has. I think I think there are other issues going on in the league that personally, maybe the World Cup qualification is like being sort of a smokescreen because people are going to be happy with the fact that they just made the World Cup. So I don't think they really care if what's going on in their local league, the fact that maybe some of the teams aren't doing well internationally in the Libertadores or Sudamericana or something like that. So, but I think just because this World Cup happened now and that they haven't been there since 2010, I think it almost feels as if, though, okay, we can excuse some of the issues that are going on domestically, because at the same time you would think, okay, because these guys come from all these sort of places around the world, that it allows people to feel like that it's in a good direction, that maybe just found the right spot, or hey, maybe we just got lucky that FIFA expanded to new spots and that Paraguay was just better than the rest of the continent. So, or the four other ones that didn't qualify. So, I think it goes through a lot of situations, but I think ultimately, from what I've been assessing, is that you know the fact that they've qualified for the World Cup has become, like I said, a smokescreen of like everything else that's going on. I would assume that, like, because they made it, because we're in a better spot than, let's say Chile, who now missed another World Cup, or Venezuela, who were so close to making their first one, but they missed it on the final day. Peru, they were at a World Cup back in 2018. They were a penalty kick away from making a second one back in Qatar. They didn't make it. So one would assume that Paraguay is in a better spot because of the generation of players, the right coach, the right rhythm, and all that kind of stuff. But of course, like many other countries out there in the world, I think there's still things to improve. And ultimately, I feel like the enthusiasm of qualifying has allowed them to feel as if, though, we'll get to those issues when this sort of tournament fever dream ends. But until then, we're going to enjoy the ride, and then after that, we'll see what happens.
Let's kind of dig deeper into the qualification, because as we know, South American qualification is one of the hardest that there is. As you say, you got Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Ecuador, Colombia. Like, there's real heavyweights. And although a healthy percentage of the continent goes through, somebody's going to be left out. And as you said, Peru didn't make it, Chile didn't make it. So how was your Paraguayan qualification?
Thankfully, it was better than the Peruvian one, to be real. But no, I think it was yin and yang, because, when you go to the start of qualification, it was with a manager that was in an entirely different situation. They actually had gone through two different managers before getting Gustavo Alfaro after the Copa America. And they only got 1 point. They only got one win out of 6 games. Scored 1 goal. It was a 1-0 victory against Bolivia at home. Until then, they had won a single game. And, they go to the Copa America. They admittedly were in a very tough group with Colombia, Brazil, and Costa Rica. They don't win any of their games. They get eliminated early. And then they go take the coach of the last team that beat them, was Costa Rica. And then after that, you think to yourself, okay, there's 18 games in total. You have 6 that are already at your hand. So you already need to really steer the ship, because it was right at the middle of it was at the end of 2024, so you had obviously September, October, November to really steady the ship if you're going to be in a good spot to qualify. In comes Alfaro, and it was a really tough window to start with. It was away to Uruguay, who had just finished third in the Copa America, who actually had done very well. They beat Brazil, they beat Argentina. Marcelo Bielsa was doing this good team, and then Brazil, obviously, for the talent that they are, and that Paraguay haven't beaten them in such a long time. What happens? Paraguay go and tie Uruguay at the Centenario in Montevideo, and then Paraguay beat them 1-0 in the Defensores, the home stadium in Paraguay, in Asunción, with a Diego Gomez golazo. And then in comes October, they tie Ecuador, a very good Ecuador side in Quito. Then they beat Venezuela. They came back, actually. They were losing at one point, and then they come back and win 2-1. And then November happened, where I thought it was the toughest, and I think the best test for me, in my opinion, is like when I thought, okay, this team has enough to qualify for the World Cup. It was at home against Argentina, the world champions, the Copa America champions, and then away to Bolivia, playing in an alto and all that altitude sort of jazz. What happens? Paraguay beats them 2-1, and then they go to Bolivia and they get a 2-2 draw over there. So it was just that little change up in, I feel as if, though, the Paraguay national team had the talent, but I think they felt like they didn't have the guy to sort of, organize them, to make them believe, to go back to the belief of a Paraguay team that went to so many World Cups from 98 to 2010. They went to 4 straight. So it was like recovering that sort of like DNA and that sort of like mystique that made them so, such a hard team to beat in, at the beginning of the 21st century, or in the late 90s. So I think that became that sort of change. And then obviously, fast forward to 2025, they win a couple more games to get some results, and then they qualify in September for the first time in 16 years. So ultimately it was a transformation that, it wasn't that sort of like, consistency that we're getting stuff. No, it was a turnaround. It was a team that, I don't want to say fairy tale, because I'm not that sort of belief of like, because I personally thought, I said this on record, like I thought Paraguay were going to qualify because I just thought they were the better team, and the spots kind of helped them in a way. I was like, okay, they might wear it out in the sixth place, maybe the playoff, but I think they were still going to do it. I was right. They finished in sixth, so I have that on the record. And that's being as bullish as I was when Paraguay was really at one of its lowest points. But anyway, but yeah, it was just a quick turnaround from them. I think the credit has to go to Gustavo Alfaro, because obviously it was the same amount of players. Obviously, there were some injuries that didn't happen in the first qualifiers, and Ciso actually was suffering a meniscus injury, so he didn't play those 6 games. Goes in the Copa America, didn't play well, and then obviously you get all the players coming in, and that's when it all changed. So I think you have to credit Gustavo Alfaro coming in and really motivating these guys, and I think it came at the right time, building the momentum, and yeah, I got them into this situation that, I think now, because, people get nostalgic, as they always do, of like the Paraguay teams of the past, and they think, okay, now we go into a World Cup where they tend to make things difficult for teams, and they go back to that sort of historical and nostalgia factors, like, hey, let's do it again, let's run it back, even if it was 16 years ago.
So, because you've brought up Alfaro a few times, how does he want his team to play? Is it going to be fun to watch, or is it going to be stereotypical hard nosed and tough?
Yeah, it's always weird when you're describing Paraguay. I think, like, we're not flashy like, or Brazil or Argentina. I think we need to understand that we need to keep to our standards, that we are going to be very ultra defensive. I'm not saying we're going to be like, boring to watch or anything like that when you compare that to other teams in Europe, like, Arsenal or, whoever. But no, I think they really rely on that DNA of being a team that is very hardworking, very solid defensively. I think that's always been sort of their DNA. I think that doesn't change. I mean, they tried in the afterwards of trying something different, being a bit more, possessive, and playing on the ultra attacking and trying to copy what Europeans do. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way with these guys who have been so used to it. So no, I think they're going to be a team that I think are going to be very good in transition. I think they're going to be good in the sense of being very counterattacking, but I think they're going to be very, very hard to beat, I would say. I think depending on your style of how you view football and how you view the sport, I think it depends. I think if you want the underdog to do well, I think this is the team to do it. And, you have flashy players. You have Enciso, who loves to score a banger from outside the box. You have obviously someone like Almiron, who is very, very quick. You have Diego Gomez, who's killing at Brighton and loves to score, from long distance, and likes to be that hard worker of any position in the midfield. You obviously have defenders like Omar Ledete and Gustavo Gomez, the 2 center backs, who obviously have been so good. So I think it'll be a sight to see. If I had to, and I have a lot of friends that are probably going to go watch Paraguay for the first time in their lives, even though I've told them about it, but they've never seen them in a World Cup or any of that sort of stuff. I tend to stand up and was like, hey, listen, this will be a team that it might be fun to watch. I hope they don't get bored, and I'm assuming that they won't, because maybe they just know me, maybe just that factor. But I think there will be a very entertaining side in the sense of what they can provide to their strengths. I think they would like to be the team that, like, if they play like a France or a Germany or or Portugal or any of those powerhouses. I think it would be a one for the neutrals. Like, if you're not supporting those teams, that you want the underdog to do it, because they're they're trying to be as defensive as possible and trying to suffocate them in that sense. But no, I think it'll be a good team that I think hopefully that people will enjoy watching for its grit, for its hard work, and not for being a boring team that's trying to bore itself for 90 minutes.
So this is the proper noun section. So we know Almiron, we know Diego Leon, maybe because of Manchester United ties or whatever else. How are the standout names that people might know? How are they trending towards the World Cup? And then maybe who are some names that we don't know that much about that are primed to play well?
Well, like I said, I think Julio Enciso, I think, is the jewel, as we say in Paraguay, the diamond, or whatever sort of a nickname they want to use. I think he's the one to watch out for. I think we kind of saw him when he broke through at Brighton at such a young age. Obviously, injury didn't get to the best of him, and obviously kind of, I don't want to say derail, but has kind of put a pause into it. He's bounced around some squads. Now he's in Strasbourg, he's in France, and they're doing very well actually this season. He's been one of their better players. I think he's already got 10 goals.
Is
In
he
all,
in the Chelsea? Sorry to interrupt. Is he in the Chelsea sphere? Is that why he's at Strasbourg, or
yes,
is it
yeah,
separate?
he's technically a blue coat player, so he might be at Stamford Bridge.
Sorry
And
about that.
who knows? Diego Gomez, I think, is someone that everyone likes to look at the new young kid from Brighton. We saw that with Alexis McAllister. We saw it with Moises Caicedo. We saw it with all these guys. Diego Gomez, he's 23 years old. He's obviously hit now double figures for Brighton, only behind one Danny Welbeck. Which again, if you're going to be behind someone, you might as well be behind him. But I think he's someone that is so versatile, and I think if he has a really good World Cup, I think all the major clubs in Europe are going to want to get him, and I think they already have because of what he's done this season. But I think if he has a really good World Cup, I think he's the one that I'm really, those two, Diego and Julio, are the ones that I'm really focused on, just because what they bring to the table, their age, and I think just their potential of what they can bring future after the World Cup.
Cool. Only a few more left. What do you think Paraguay's ceiling is, and what is their floor?
Oh, I think their floor is definitely getting grouped. I think definitely not getting out of that group, which again is a tough one. You have the United States as the host. I think certainly they just played them in a friendly a couple months ago, and they got beat 2-1. So there is that familiarity. I think that's good. Maybe that they know what to expect, especially heading into a World Cup, and that sort of feeling of being the first game against the host, and that sort of anticipation that maybe they don't feel as much pressure in comparison to what the US are going to feel, and I think that's probably going to help them. Who knows? Turkey, I think, are obviously, as we know, with their talented players like Arda Güler, like Kylian Yildiz, and obviously the fact that they were able to get away from qualification from those a couple weeks ago against Romania and Kosovo. So they're obviously going to be a very tough team. And then you have Australia, a team that I think has obviously always improved. I feel like at every sort of World Cup cycle, I think they won't be very much a pushover because I feel like they punch above their weight at World Cups. So I think if they can't get out of the group, especially the fact that the majority of the teams that don't that do, so the majority of the teams qualify to the next stage and being out of it, 32 compared to 16. So I think getting out of the group is a huge bare minimum for sure. I think the positioning is going to be debatable because of how tight everything will be. And I think their ceiling. Look, I feel like it's such a weird World Cup because of obviously the new teams and the the environment and the sort of fact that you're playing in the United States, so maybe there is that sort of feeling of diaspora being played a factor. I don't want to say home advantage because there's not a lot of us, but I feel like maybe it is that factor. It's very hot in the summer here in the United States, so. And these are Paraguayans that are used to that. It's traditionally very hot in the country as well, so they know what it's like to play in this sort of environment. That said, I think they should have enough to qualify out of the group. I think, depending on who they face and where they finish, they should head to the round of 16. And, their best ever finish was a quarterfinal. So I think if they're able to be in that position, I think people will be very, very happy. I think they'll be well received back home. I think they'll be well received back home, even if they finish in the round of 16 and maybe they lose bravely to a big powerhouse. Obviously, win the World Cup would be the biggest dream of them all. But no, I think generally thinking like round of 16 quarterfinals, I think, recover that sort of history that they happened beforehand, be as competitive and try to go at the highest level, I think would be their ceiling. But definitely, if it is their floor, is definitely getting grouped. People do not want that to happen.
How would you define success?
Well,
Just get out of the group. That's a successful tournament for Paraguay.
Maybe not for me. Maybe for not a majority of fans. Look, I think everyone is very realistic, and everyone wants to dream of being world champions. Absolutely, who doesn't? But no, I think that's the thing with Paraguayans as well. I feel like the fact that they went to the World Cup so many times, that this generation has been so accustomed to it, they think that like, oh, we could do it again like we did in 98, 02, 06, and 10. It's like things have changed. And that's why, it's good that we've had these sort of friendlies to really just know where we are. We beat Greece and they lost to Morocco 2-1. So there is that feeling of like, yeah, we can do it. And especially that the group is not as hard in comparison to other groups, and the fact that there's teams that are of similar level. It's not like you're playing like France or Spain or something like that. they're all. What I'm saying is they're all winnable games.
Right.
So that being said, no, I think they would love to do more, just because maybe because they have that chip on their shoulder. The fact that they beat Brazil, they beat Argentina, they beat Uruguay. They have that history of beating the powerhouses. So it's like, okay, why not do it with all the other guys? So no, I think getting out of the group is, for me, I think a lot of Paraguayans will say bare minimum. I think if they finish in, like I said, the round of 16, depending on who they face, and they lose bravely, penalties or whatever, I think that would be fine. But of course, everyone wants to be world champions. Let's be real. I don't think that'll happen, but it's the dream that everyone wants.
I mean, what do they say? In order to win the raffle, you have to buy a ticket, or whatever the phrase is. So you're there. So there's a chance, it's an outside chance, but there's a chance.
I always say it to my friends, for the World Cup, like all the 48 teams have a chance of winning the World Cup. That's why it's the best tournament in the world, because you have that feeling that it's possible. Because
who's your pick to win? Like if it's not Paraguay, then who's your pick to win? I'm asking everybody this one.
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm putting me right on the spot.
But you can give maybe like some picks. You don't have to pick the winner, but like who are your favorites?
I mean, I can never count out Argentina, just because they're world champions. The Messi factor, I think they've been so good in a lot. I mean, they haven't prepared in the best way, but hey, they're still going to be there. France have looked very, very scary. They're a really good team with really good players. Spain, obviously, everyone talks about them. And can I say a fourth? Can I say one more?
Keep going.
I'll say Brazil. I know people want to, poo-poo on them just because they haven't been as hot in the last few, years. Basically, they haven't won the World Cup, but they're still Brazil, man. Like, they're still a team that has that feeling. And hey, last time it was in America, they won the World Cup, so maybe there is that historical factor. So I'm just gonna say those four for now. That it goes either Spain, France, Argentina, or Brazil. I think one of those four is gonna win the World Cup.
Fair enough.
Or Paraguay. You never know.
And if that's the semifinal that we get, those four that you named, with Paraguay obviously losing in the quarterfinal, that would be a great, I think, end to a tournament, despite all the other things that are surrounding this one. Last question, Roberto: is there anything I haven't asked about Paraguay that you think is particularly interesting or cool that you think people might want to know or should know?
I guess the only thing, I don't know how much people know about like just Paraguay as a country. We're one of the few countries that we have two official languages, and I think that is unique in a place like South America because of obviously the history and the fact that, obviously there was that colonization so many centuries ago. But we have a indigenous language called Guarani. It's one of our traditional languages and an official language. It's why I say it's important as well is that it's spoken from, obviously it's indigenous, but it's spoken from all walks of life. It could be someone from the poorest village in Paraguay to someone that works in the most white collar job in the capital. So, and the beautiful thing as well is that the players always communicate in that language. It feels like sort of a bonding thing that, like, I'm not saying everyone's a good like word master and that they're able to word what they're saying when they're mouthing something, but for those that can, like, you're probably not going to hear Spanish most of the time. You're probably going to hear that language just because it's like a secret language that's like not a lot of people know besides though that come from, like, people might know Spanish. I mean, there's so many players that play in, Spain or have Spanish teammates, and just because how popular the language is. But once you get to Guarani, it's like, well, what are they saying? So it might be something that hopefully might factor them in some big games where it's like they caught them by surprise because of that language. I don't know how many countries can say that they have like a secret sort of code or language that could help a team win a match or something.
No, that's dope. Roberto, I really appreciate you doing this. Where can people find you and your podcast and your work again?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. You can find me on all social media at Roberto Rojas 97. Obviously, I do two podcasts that are different in, obviously soccer, but it's still the sport as it is. You got Low Limit Football with my co-host Joe Ucello. That's Low Limit Football, the Spanish word. You can listen to us every week where we talk about all the things that are going on in the world of soccer. And of course, you can check out Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. We do a show every week talking about everything that's going on with Paraguayan soccer, be it the league, the players, national team. We're obviously going to go very strong when the World Cup happens. I think a lot of people will want to pay attention to them. But yeah, thank you for having me, and absolutely check out those two podcasts whenever you can find them.
Definitely, all the links will be in the description. Roberto, again, I thank you for taking the time, bro. It's been really good. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.